With your book, one thing that comes through really is the empathy. And also, you know, you're having conversations with people that many of us are afraid to have again and again. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about how you open up these difficult conversations with people, because this is something you have a real skill at doing. What would be your advice?
It's I mean, I think it's something I've learned over more than 30 years, but I think I'm still learning, actually. It's a tricky thing because we have our own internal landscape when we enter into a situation with somebody. And so you're dealing with your own fear, your own worry, your own self-consciousness. And that can be so loud, I think, when we're entering into these conversations. So I think the practice for me has been, and this happened early on because I didn't know what to say. There's a story in the book of a man I was looking after, and I just didn't have the words of, comfort. I just had no idea how you comfort somebody. And then I learned very quickly that maybe my quiet is helpful. And I think that was just because I didn't know what else to do in the early days. But, I think we can learn to be very good listeners. And I think as I developed, I started to become a very good questioner. I asked a lot of questions. And again, I'm not sure that's actually the root. We ask a lot of questions often when we're uncomfortable. So I think the more comfortable we can get to sit with somebody who's, clearly in their own process and not assume that they want to talk about anything. And I think in the book, you see this where you have to, you can say something simple like, what can you, are you okay to talk about that? Would you be up for conversation? I think asking for permission to enter into a conversation is extremely important, because I think, and I learned this as I went along, I was a bit too bold after a while, thinking, well, I'll just launch in. And then there's a sensitivity, of course, to, what moment is that person having right now? Maybe it's a moment where they really want a reprieve from thinking about their illness.
And I think your book is good in the way that it offers examples of people who want to talk about death and dying and think about that, and also people who resist it, and how over the course of your career, you learn to respect different people's wishes and ways of being. I was very struck by what you said about, sitting with someone, allowing yourself to be silent. I don't know if it was Jack, but I did write down a bit in the book, which I thought was very moving. You write, with Jack, I learned it was not my responsibility to take away his sorrow and worry, but more to offer a soft place of caring for his feelings to land. I found that if I mostly listened and spoke rarely, Jack talked himself through his feelings until he finally ran out of words, and a deep quiet wrapped around us. And I think there's something about that compassionate, empathetic listening and going, sitting beside someone. That's part of the power of what you do.
Yeah, I think there's there's an awkwardness, I think, for most of us to think, let's trust this space and this quiet to open up something. And the more you learn to wait, the more you'll see that the person will join you in that space. I mean, that's that beautiful quote by Rumi, there's you probably know this, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field, I will meet you there. And I think, what is that field when you're with someone and you're in a space together that you don't really need to direct, and you don't need to make it something that it's not, and allow for whatever it is. And I think that's what I've learned to do. And I think it's appreciated because I'm not trying to get something from the person or draw them out, but I'm actually actively holding some corners of that space, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm sitting just holding the space, and that's a kind of common phrase these days, but I think it's very deliberate, where you can just say, can I trust this quiet space? And then that's where the person, often something comes out, and then you just keep going with that, hold a space for that. Maybe it's a fear or a worry,
I think in some of the more hopeful stories in the book, you kind of, again, you give lots of different examples and different deaths, but some of them you can see the people opening up to death is the phrase that you use. And I just wonder if you can sort of say a bit more on what it means to open up to death?
I think a lot of that has to do with the person themselves coming into acceptance. And this is true of our lives. What makes us say, okay, this is what's happening to me? And so much of our minds want to say, no, it's not, it can't be, I don't want this to be happening. But that's also happening, this part of us that wants to reject difficult experiences. So I think opening up means opening up to all of that, to say, I don't want to talk about this because it's too scary. I don't know why I don't want to talk about it, but I feel this visceral resistance. So I think, again, if there's permission for that, I think we push too hard and we say, I want to be able to, there's a story in the book, where this wife of a man who really doesn't want to talk about dying at all, and she needs to and wants to. And this is where the tension builds, because I think the person and the family members often, I really want to understand what you need and want. But the person's in there's a real defense up. And I think we have defenses up for a reason. We're being asked for too much. So it's like, ask for less and perhaps just open the door a crack. And sometimes the person will walk through that crack. And that's what I think you're looking for. And the opening up, as you build confidence to say, okay, maybe I can talk about dying, and then you see your family actually longs for those conversations too. And then that's where you start to see it get some momentum. And until the time comes where the family can be very open about, and there can be humor about it, and there can be Black humor. And, but it's a slow process. And I think sometimes there's this urgency that comes in all our families to, we want to be closer. And I think death so much, creates a distance. And I'm always saying, well, how can we stay connected right till the end? And so a lot of it has to do with conversation and this quality of presence that I was talking about, where you can just sit quietly. What's that like, to just sit quietly with your loved one or someone that you're accompanying in some way. So, but the conversation is tricky because there's a lot of protectiveness in families, as we know. So we're afraid to open up a conversation about dying in case we cause harm, or in case the person is, awkward, or, you upset them. There's this thing about, what if I make them cry? And, I often say, well, the tears are just there already. They're right behind our eyes, aren't they? They're not manufactured in the conversation. Perhaps they come up during the conversation. And we have to get a bit braver, I think, about letting ourselves feel that emotion, because the emotion keeps the energetic of the conversation moving. I always say sometimes it's a bit of a design flaw that we can't cry and talk at the same time, but really it helps things move along. And
people say this about grief, that people who are grieving, they often encounter friends who don't want to mention, the person who's died, in case they'll get upset. And they're upset anyway.
Exactly.
So, they're not going to, become upset because they mentioned, but in fact, they'll feel pleased that they're being remembered. So I think it's similar. It's not the conversation that causes the upset.
That's right.
It's the kind of bigger, wider context of what's happening.
That's right. And I think it's our sense of responsibility over somebody's emotional state. I think we think we have some responsibility that actually we don't have. I think we have a shared responsibility not to cause harm. But I think we have to deepen our trust in someone's ability to find their way into those conversations, rather than we have to kind of drag them in. And I think it's that, it happens in grief too, where, people say, well, why aren't they talking to me about their sorrow? And well, because at the moment they need to hold it very close. It doesn't mean they're not feeling it or experiencing it. Or maybe they're having a day where they're just, again, there's a reprieve of not thinking or talking about it. So, but I think we're clumsy in our conversations. And I suppose that's one of the things I think we can get better at. I mean, the good news is you can learn how to do that better.